adjudicate the defendant guilty, sentence him to 15 years Florida State Prison, and that'll run consecutive to count 1, for a total of 24 years Florida State Prison.
Shock, regret, and maybe even a hint of sadness. That's what you're gonna see in today's episode. As the judge delivers the verdict, you can see a mix of emotions on their faces. It's a sobering reminder that life can change in an instant, and the choices we make can have serious consequences. In today's video, we're going to witness the raw and unfiltered reactions of these individuals as they receive their life sentences. But be warned, it's going to be a roller coaster of emotions, and you won't want to miss it. The first convict on the list is Amber Pereira. This 29-year-old woman from Brandon faced her brutal hearing. Emotions ran high as she listened to testimony about the horrific crash she's accused of causing on the Salmon Expressway, a crash that claimed the lives of a family of 3, Louise Philippak, Rita Philippak, and their young daughter, Georgia, just 8 years old. Amber Pereira dropped her head into her hands in despair, crying uncontrollably. She appeared to pray as Tampa detectives spoke about the victims, and at one point, the judge had to threaten to remove her from court if she didn't compose herself. Pereira's family was also present in court, but the grief was too overwhelming for some of them and they had to leave. It was a somber scene and you could feel the weight of the tragedy in the air. According to the police, one crash survivor suffered a fractured spine and several broken ribs. Witnesses testified that Pereira was driving at an alarming speed of 100 miles per hour or more before the crash occurred. State Prosecutor Scott Herron minced no words when he said that she left her work in the beginning of the rush hour and went across the Salmon Expressway at 90 miles per hour, ramming the victim's car without evidence of her braking. The gravity of the situation was bad in the courtroom. Pereira's defense claimed that she had a seizure while driving, which led to the crash. A co-worker, India McClooney, who worked with Pereira at a local law firm, testified that Pereira had a seizure earlier in the day as well. But state prosecutors weren't convinced. They argued that Pereira was under the influence of Lexapro and Ativan, medications that can impair driving, and should have stayed off the road. It was a devastating blow to Pereira's defense, and it left her in a precarious situation. Number 2, Cameron Herron. This young man was sentenced to 24 years in prison for a devastating traffic crash that took the lives of an innocent Ohio mother, Jessica Raysinger Robineau, and her precious 1-year-old daughter, Lilia. Cameron had just received a shiny new Mustang as a graduation gift, and only 2 days later, tragedy struck. He was out driving with his friend John Barrineau, who was in another car, and they were allegedly racing each other on Tampa's Bayshore Boulevard. Witnesses reported seeing Cameron's Mustang going over 100 miles per hour before the crash, and it's just heart-wrenching to think about the speed and impact of that collision. During the trial, Cameron's mom Cheryl spoke up and said that she felt responsible for this accident. If she could, she would step in front of Cameron and would accept the punishment given. The judge, Christopher Nash, said during the trial, it's impossible to have greater harm than occurred in this case, and he's absolutely right. Lives were lost, families were shattered, and there's no turning back the clock. Cameron's actions have left a permanent scar on everyone involved, and it's a stark reminder of the consequences of reckless behavior. There was genuine remorse in his eyes. He seemed truly sorry for what he had done and the pain he had caused. He acknowledged his responsibility for the accident and expressed deep regret throughout the session. Anyways, that wasn't enough to break down his sentence. He was sentenced to 18.5 years. Number 3, Daryl Brooks. This guy drove his SUV through a parade route and struck 69 people. Yes! During his sentencing hearing, Brooks offered an apology, but it was just a few sentences in a 2-hour statement that was all over the place. He kept portraying himself as a victim, calling himself the most hated man on the planet, and talking about his childhood, his faith, and his frustration with the prosecution team. He even spoke tearfully about his family and kids, trying to tug at the heartstrings. But honestly, it just felt like a feeble attempt to gain sympathy. And you know what's even crazier? When asked why he drove his SUV through the parade route, he didn't really give an answer. He kept saying it wasn't intentional, that it wasn't an attack. But it didn't make sense. His 80-year-old grandmother even tried to blame his mental illness, saying he's had bipolar disorder since he was 12. But the judge didn't buy it. The judge, Doro, actually said that Brooks had been examined by 4 psychiatric experts, who all found that he wouldn't qualify for a not guilty by reason of mental disease defense. She said he had an antisocial personality disorder, but that he knew what he was doing on that day and that he tried to evade authorities afterward. So the mental illness excuse didn't hold up. During the hearing, Brooks kept interrupting the judge, just like he did during the trial. He was removed from the courtroom and brought back later, but he still refused to sit down and argue with the judge. Finally, when the judge read out his sentence from a remote courtroom, Brooks showed little reaction. He just stood there with his head down, as if it didn't matter to him. Number 4, Todd Grundy. Now, Todd wasn't a stranger to DUIs. In fact, he had a history of drunk driving. But it was that one fateful night in September 2018 that changed everything. Todd rear-ended Angela Wimmer's car at a red light in Lakewood, pushing it into oncoming traffic. Her car got hit by not 1, not 2, but 3 other vehicles. The impact was so brutal that Todd's license plate was actually stamped onto Angela's car. Fast forward to Todd's trial, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and driving under the influence. Todd's friends and family spoke up in court, saying he wasn't a total monster and that he was genuinely remorseful. His sister-in-law, Yvette Waller, even said that he had always been caring, kind, and helpful. But it was Todd's own words that really caught everyone's attention. During his allocution, Todd took the opportunity to speak directly to the court. He expressed deep remorse for his actions and apologized to Angela's family, who sadly wasn't present in the courtroom. Todd said he was so truly sorry to the family and everybody else affected. It was a stark reminder that actions have consequences, and Todd was about to pay the price for his choices. Number 5, Grace Coleman. Grace, who's just 23 years old, was involved in a drunken hit-and-run crash that took the lives of a young mother and father who were out with their 3 little daughters looking at Christmas lights. During her sentencing, something truly heart-wrenching happened. 2 of the orphaned girls, Emma Sophia and Elena, had the courage to speak in court. They read the letters they had written to their parents. These sweet little girls who had lost their mom and dad stood up in front of everyone and poured out their hearts. Grace Coleman didn't say anything during the hearing, but she had a private meeting with the family of the victims before the sentencing. According to the family's lawyer, they believe that Grace is remorseful and that she made a terrible mistake. But you know what? They're not an angry, bitter family. They didn't mention hatred or anger towards her. They believe she needs help, not hatred. Prosecutors say that Grace had a blood alcohol level of 0.22, which is almost 3 times the legal limit. The judge didn't go easy on Grace either. He imposed a sentence of 15 years for the murder charges, along with additional years for the other charges related to drunken driving and hit and run. Number 6, Jordan Fuss. This man here caused that tragic crash back in 2014 that took the life of a little boy, Santiago Giraldo. When Jordan walked into that courtroom, he was a mess. I mean, the guy was shaking like a leaf, and his family was by his side, trying to hold it together. But the prosecutors had some damning evidence. They said Jordan had admitted to using alcohol and drugs since the crash. Turns out he was driving at over 90 miles per hour with a blood alcohol level that was way over the legal limit. Anyway, after going through these 6 cases, it's hard not to feel a sense of remorse and sadness witnessing the devastating aftermath of hit-and-run incidents. It's a stark reminder that actions have consequences, and the impact of reckless decisions can be irreversible. Anyway, thanks for joining us on this eye-opening journey. Until next time, remember to stay safe and let's make our roads a better place for everyone.